Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. This is the case against social media censorship. I am not saying that a big company has some sort of obligation to host whoever. I'm also not saying, well, it's private, so nothing counts. My general claim here is that these companies, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, are engaged in a breach of contract when they delete an account who has not violated any of the general understandings that existed at the time they created said account. Stephen Kinsella, the patent attorney, defines a contract as being a relation between two or more parties, which includes legally enforceable obligations between them. The term enforceable in this context means that the use of physical force or the threat thereof would be justifiable response to any breach of said contract. So consider the apartment analogy. I move from my state all the way to a different place, and I move all my stuff in there under the guise of, so long as I pay you the rent on the agreed upon date, and I abide by the rules, which are no theft, no murder, no kidnapping, no slavery, no loud noise between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. Now, there is some ambiguity with these sorts of things. So, for example, what if I have stolen something a long time ago in a different location? Well, that doesn't really count. There's, room for debate. Well, define loud noise. At what point is something loud? Well, you should be able to have a general understanding. So, but the fact that ambiguity exists in agreements is no justification to say that, well, we therefore know nothing and can't have any idea as to whether or not someone is in breach of contract. Nor does it mean we need a state to determine how this ambiguity is decided. In fact, because things are complex, it's the reason we shouldn't have a coercively funded monopoly making decisions for us. So, I move in under the contractual understanding that so long as I abide by these rules, I have a place to live. So I invest a lot of time in my apartment. I build furniture, I make paintings, I hang them up, I invite people over, I tell everyone where I live, I get a job in the neighborhood, I really am planting myself in this geographical area, and then one day I get home and you've burned down, technically, your apartment. The fact that you are a private citizen does not mean that it's morally justified. You are in breach of contract. We had a general understanding. And when I say, you just burned down my apartment for no reason, what the heck is going on here? And you say, well, you watched an R-rated movie, and that goes against my rules. Well, no, that doesn't go against any of the generally agreed upon rules that we had when I was purchasing this. That is an example of a breach of contract where a private owner would not have a right to do something because it violates the general understanding they had with the second party in the contract. Now, people may say, well, if you look at the fine print of Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, it actually says A, B, or C. This is irrelevant. Here we have the definition of a meeting of the minds. This is an understanding or agreement between two people or groups. This is 100 times more valuable than any technicality because, as we saw in the last example, what does it mean to have loud noise at 11 p.m.? Define loud. What is exactly the number at which something is loud versus being quiet? Is it murder if I sell someone cigarettes? Look, you have to be able to have general understandings between parties and be able to criticize people's definition of these things in order for people to live productive lives and engage in trade. The analogy that I would use for a meeting of the minds is, say, I always go to this place and a glass of wine is $10, and so I go there and sit down and I just say, give me a glass of red wine, please. And then the waitress comes back, gives me a drink. I then ask for another one. It turns out I've been getting this bottle here that is $303,000. And she said, well, you never said that you wanted the same one that was only $10 a glass, so I gave you this. You now have an obligation to pay that. No, you don't. There's a general understanding between you that you know what they meant. Something this outrageous is not enforceable. By the same token, say that you go to a restaurant, order food off the menu, and then they come to you with the bill, and you say, I never said that I would pay for this stuff. I ordered stuff and you brought it to me, but I never agreed that I would pay for the food that I ordered. No, There's a meeting of the minds. This is a general understanding or agreement between two persons. You don't have to list out every single thing that could ever be done in order for people to have just obligations to one another in a contract. So we see this a lot of places where companies or organizations or garage sales, just a business does not change the moral obligations or abilities that you have. You'll see something explicitly: no refunds, no exchanges, wet paint, do not touch this, do not take pictures of this. Warning, this is a pop-up warning telling you something very important. You have menus at restaurants that explicitly say, here is the price, order this, you have an obligation to pay this. We see this all the time in the private sector, voluntary exchanges where companies will say, here is the deal, buyer beware, this is what happens. In the same way, you might have a buyer beware sign, a trespasser beware sign on your private property. You have to make it explicit. Just because someone takes one step on your property, it doesn't give you the right to blow their head off or anything. So it is not unreasonable for me to say, well, Twitter has the right to be a leftist-only platform, or YouTube, whatever platform. They just have to come out and say, just so you know, anyone who, questions statism or questions official stories before starting an account here, before you invest all your time, effort, and money, just know that we're going to take your account down if you question official narratives. That's just going to happen. Now, I don't think you should spend time on a platform like that, but if that was the agreement, then they would be justified in doing so. But because they sell themselves as YouTube, this is your website on our platform, just don't break these very simple rules, I don't even want to get into what the general rules would be, but no advocacy of violence against peaceful people. Now, granted, that would mean anyone who advocates government would be banned. So there again, we have shortcomings in contracts. But the reality is they claim to say anyone can come on, just don't break the big ones. Don't be advocating violence. Don't be doxing people. And then they delete Derek Bros today for, whatever reason. They don't even tell you a reason anymore. They banned Stefan Molyneux. They banned The Last American Vagabond. They, silenced my video, why they hate us. So, total blatant breach of contract on their side. There are a lot of papers refuting the idea that monopolies are anything that we need to really be afraid of. This is The Myth of Natural Monopoly by Thomas J. DiLorenzo, The Myth of the Robber Barons by Bert Folsom, and The Protectionist Roots of Antitrust by Donald J. Boudreaux. The idea that monopolies are the result of voluntary exchange and need to be regulated by the state has been thoroughly refuted in these papers if you'd like more information. Now, what is the solution? Well, excellent places like Internet Archive to store videos. They've been very good. They do follow copyright, which is illegitimate. However, that is a alternative. As far as search engines go, you don't have to use Google. Here, you can use 100searchengines.com. You can use DuckDuckGo. You can use startpage.com. These places are constantly innovating and getting better. There are alternatives you can do right now. You don't have to say, oh, Congress, please regulate. Oh, I need other people to go there first. You don't have to wait for other people to take things into your own hands here. We also have alternatives to Patreon, which is locals. This was started by Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. I know Michael Malice is on there, Yaron Brook is on there, Scott Adams is an investor. This is an excellent alternative, and they take a smaller amount of your money. This is where people should be going. My favorite place is LBRY, and BitChute is a close second because they now have a working search engine, whereas, they didn't before. These places are constantly improving. Minds.com, you used to only be allowed to upload 4-minute videos, and now there is no limit as far as I know. I uploaded a 9-hour compilation video on mine, so these places, while they're not the best now, they're constantly improving, and I'd say LBRY is just as good as YouTube as far as freedom and the amount of, the alternative information. I think BitChute is one of the best places. There's also a place brand new tube. I don't know that much about it, but check it out. Well, we need to constantly be looking for competitors, because the solution is not to have the state regulate speech, or under the guise of enforcing free speech, the state has no right to interfere, simply because we can look at how much governments value free speech. Specifically, the U.S. government that allegedly, according to Will Chamberlain on Twitter, they have to abide by the First Amendment. No, they don't. Here we have PolitiFact, who gave this a fully truth statement score. The Obama administration has used the Espionage Act to go after whistleblowers who leak to journalists more than all previous administrations combined. So the idea that, well, the Hunter Biden story is an example of social media censoring a story, so therefore the government should take over social media, or the government should start regulating it. That is the worst solution. For every one, example you have of social media, well, government is going to do it just as bad. You think AOC or Lindsey Graham is going to be on there making sure, or, the CIA or the NSA is going to be like, well, we need to make sure that people promoting the Second Amendment, people questioning climate change, people explaining the principles of free market economics are able to be on the stage here. No, they're going to call it false information spreading and a threat to national security, so they need to be regulated, as we saw in the case of Bradley Manning, who went to jail for exposing crimes. The murderers didn't go to jail. He, of course, went to jail. We saw students protesting at Kent State, and the government went there and shot them. They just killed 4 people. I mean, I'd say that's a pretty damning indictment of, the government not allowing or supporting free speech. So coming up with individual examples is just ridiculous. There were U.S. intelligence sources that discussed poisoning Julian Assange. Usually they'd be saying, or you'd think at least they'd be saying, this man is a hero. He exposed crimes. He enlightened us and allowed us to improve. No, the government's after him. They have political criminals all the time. Also, watch out for disinformation agents. There's something called Operation Mockingbird, a large-scale program of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency that began in the early years of the Cold War and attempted to manipulate news media for propaganda purposes. This was released in the Church Committee. The documents are verifiable. Online, they had at least minimum 400 CIA agents active in U.S. media and academia. One of the things that is not exactly discussed. An introductory article on this would be The CIA and the Media by Carl Bernstein, going back to 1953. Church Committee, by the way, was in the 70s, I believe. So the idea that, well, if conspiracies, maybe they could happen, but you can't keep them secret. No, they were secret for, at least 20 years. Also, at the time, you just had ABC, CBS, and NBC to give you the news. So we're still constantly improving. The fact that we have access to Minds, LBRY, BitChute, Archive.org, and these other competing places, which are constantly getting better all the time as more people are moving to them. They have more of an incentive to give us a better product. But yeah, I mean, if you read the article, on other occasions, their assignments were more complex, planting subtly concocted pieces of misinformation, hosting parties or receptions designed to bring together American agents and foreign spies, serving up black propaganda to leading foreign assets, etc. So the idea that, well, we are not going to get the truth out of what's going on because, Twitter is interfering in what would otherwise be a free conversation. That does not justify getting the state involved at all. Look at what they do constantly. And there's no one talking about, dismantling the CIA. But, of course, this is a classic example of having very high standards for the private sector, but no standards at all for the theft-funded mass-murdering government. How about when the U.S. government outlawed a newspaper? Certainly, this is why we can't have the government telling us about speech. There are calls to privatize government because of this example of them not respecting free speech. Again, showing me individual examples or a bunch of individual examples is not a justification for the state monopolizing or nationalizing or regulating any aspects of social media. Iraqi outcry as U.S. bans newspaper. Hundreds of Iraqis have protested in Baghdad after a Shia newspaper was banned for allegedly inciting violence against a U.S.-led coalition. So if you're expecting the government to say, We're going to stop free speech because we like tyranny. Of course, it's never going to come out as that. It's always going to be under the guise of, well, there were people inciting violence. This would lead to another Timothy McVeigh, another government agent, obviously, was in the military, hanging out with ATF agents like Carol Howe all over Elohim City. Another fake story. U.S. troops earlier delivered a letter announcing a 60-day ban on the weekly. Yeah, that's the freedom of speech government that people want controlling social media or regulating social media. There was this book, Operation Darkheart, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. So this is what they do to the military. You'd think that these people would get some sort of a pass and they'd go easy on them. Look, these troops are just trying to, that they protect and serve the public. So they're just trying to inform the public, obviously. The U.S. Special Operations Command in July identified 250 pages they claimed contained classified information. So, yes, deleting tweets is bad. Also, deleting pages from a book is bad, outlawing them, saying, oh, this is classified. Anyone who gets their hands on this is illegal. The first uncensored printing of printing of 9,500 copies was purchased for $47,300 in early September and destroyed by the publisher at the request of the Pentagon. This happens all the time. The existence of a state or the U.S. government, even with the First Amendment, is not a solution. The solution is to embrace competition and go to competitors. Here are 10 people that fell under leak investigations during Obama's presidency. Now, you can pause and read into these, but just so you know the names of people that were gone after by the government, and there was not even some big outcry. Obama wasn't hated. Obama didn't go to jail. He got the Nobel Peace Prize. Thomas Drake, Shimani Leibowitz, Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, Stephen Kim, James Rosen, Jeffrey Sterling, James Risen, John Kiriakou, Donald Shadowblin. Here is another example of the government silencing people. Dinesh D'Souza came out with a book, Roots of Obama's Rage, and made a number of other things heavily criticizing Obama. For those of you not in the U.S., for a non-white person to criticize the left in a very in-depth, very systematic way, especially a black president, that is a big thing that they can't have. They have to only address their opposition as a bunch of racists. So Dinesh D'Souza's very existence is a huge threat to leftist policies in America. Donald Trump also said people should go to jail for a year. On multiple occasions, he was serious about it for burning the flag. Again, that's a property rights violation. It's your flag. You can burn it and do whatever you want. Dinesh D'Souza recently came out with a video that said, I was locked behind bars for what hundreds of Biden supporters are currently doing without punishment. So Dinesh D'Souza went to jail, obviously, because he was speaking out against the Obama administration. This is the equivalent of jaywalking, walking across the road at a non-crosswalk. Yes, technically it's against the law, but no one goes to jail for it. And here's an example. Hundreds of Biden supporters actually were... the state notified the Obama campaign, the Biden campaign, for a number of people that have given more money than is allowed, so they were told to give the money back. People didn't go to jail like Dinesh D'Souza did because the government wasn't respecting his free speech. The most obvious example is James Clapper getting up, lying under oath to Congress about Edward Snowden releasing the PRISM documents. Also, don't embrace regulation because we have what is called regulatory capture, which is a corruption of authority that occurs when a political entity, policymaker, or regulatory agency is co-opted to serve the commercial, ideological, or political interests of a minor constituency, such as a particular geographic area, industry, profession, or ideological group. In other words, they want to regulate the pharmaceutical industry. Who knows a lot about pharmaceuticals so they could regulate? Well, the CEO of Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, and everywhere else. Well, what do you think those people are going to do? You think they're unbiased? We have perfect examples of this. So if they were going to regulate social media, people who have total vested interest would engage in the regulation at the expense of us then being able to go to competitors. Michael R. Taylor, for example, FDA Deputy Commission and Vice President for Public Policy at Monsanto. Walmart calls on Congress to raise the minimum wage. Why would big corporations, aren't they supposed to be these free market, Wild West people? No. They, of course, support raising the minimum wage because their competitors, who are much smaller, cannot afford to comply with it. This was CEO Doug McMullen. And then H. Lee Scott, the previous CEO of Walmart, also came out in favor of the minimum wage. You also have Hank Paulson, Secretary of Treasury, there to keep us safe. Also the CEO of Goldman Sachs, former CEO. Now, Wall Street donors reportedly favor Biden over Trump in 2020 election. How is that? Biden's talking about regulation and the need for bigger government. Big corporations are constantly pushing big government because they're the ones who have a direct phone line to the policymakers. I'm still waiting for one of them to call me and ask me to explain the principles of voluntarism to them. They don't assist minorities. They do. Isolated ideas. If we want a chance for the truth to get out, we have to embrace alternatives. We have to keep going to others. We didn't say government needs to regulate TV because we don't have ABC, NBC, and CBS. That they never report the truth, so we need government to regulate them. We got YouTube. Now YouTube is a totally controlled platform, so we go to Minds. Let's say Minds gets taken, then we go to LBRY. We have to constantly out-innovate. We can't just say there is a solution and we need to give a ton of power to these people. This way, things end up getting good. Look, Amazon's also calling for the ability to raise the minimum wage. Jeff Bezos said, "We listen to our critics," and their minimum wage calls, and now they're coming out in support of the raising the federal minimum wage. You think small businesses can afford what Amazon can afford? You think they can afford to employ someone that has no skills and no experience? No, not at all. But Amazon and Walmart can. That is the general reason that big corporations support big regulations. Here they mention in this article that Joe Biden got $29 million from Wall Street, Trump got $6 million, which you'd think would be the opposite with how the idea of, well, regulation is against what, the private sector wants, so they're going to all back Trump while, the people are going to support the left. It's the opposite of everything. Look at how Citigroup decided Barack Obama's staff. I mean, this was the guy who was so anti-bank. He was for the people. He's, from this impoverished town. He's really going to stand up for us. Again, corporations co-opting the state to work against freedom and voluntarism. Goldman Sachs, top Obama donor, according to CNN. Now, Obama supported regulation known as the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Wouldn't they have gotten all their media outlets to say this is terrible and everyone would know how bad these regulations are? No, because what happened was Dodd-Frank was embraced and credit unions who couldn't afford the compliance with the regulations went out of business while the big banks got bigger as they are today. With regulation, small businesses hurt, big businesses helped because they're able to comply. They have fewer competition. They have less competition. This gives consumers less choice. This gives employees less choice of places to work. This lowers quality because there's less innovation and investment. The most obvious example of regulatory capture is in a book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, A Second Look at the Federal Reserve. So after a number of bank panics caused, of course, by state interference in the banking system, a regulation to fix the banking system was proposed. So the Federal Reserve Act, which was passed in 1913, was written in around 1910 on Jekyll Island between the following people: Nelson Aldrich, Republican whip in the Senate; Henry P. Davidson, a senior partner of J.P. Morgan; Charles D. Norman, president of the First National Bank of New York; A. Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury; Frank Vanderlip, President of the National City Bank of New York; Benjamin Strong, head of J.P. Morgan Bankers Trust; and Paul Warburg, partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Shouldn't they have asked for no government at all? No, of course, they drastically increased the power of the government, as big corporations always do. The solution is embracing competition, not regulation or state involvement. The question is, who regulates the regulators? Who watches the watchers? We could only embrace a system of competition, because all the criticisms of, well, look at what the private companies do, therefore we need government. Government does it way worse because they know people can't opt out of funding them if they produce a bad product. Now look at this picture here. Barack Obama hanging around with Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs, Steve Wesley, Dick Costolo, Reed Hastings, John Chambers, Eric Schmidt, and Dorr at this secret dinner that they had. These people are more or less friends organizing to conspire against the public. This is one of those pictures that just looks fake. I actually did have to look it up. Obama to meet with Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and other tech leaders. The picture was verified. Either way, there's so much evidence that big government and big business constantly can work together to conspire against the public, not to make sure that the people are being served or there's a good product or service. Look, don't be afraid that these companies are so big. The really big things that we could never imagine ever going away, MySpace, Blockbuster, Sears, end up going away. Starbucks was the only place to get coffee. It was taking over. And now Dutch Brothers is everywhere. Or not even coffee places. People now make coffee at home. If you look at the companies in the Fortune 500, only these 60 companies were in the Fortune 500 in both 1955 and 2016. The way to stop monopolies or big businesses having too much power is to embrace competition, is to use alternatives. Just because they're big and influential now, Fortune 500, doesn't mean they will be there forever. We have the professor of economics and public policy and philosophy, Jason Brennan, who works at Georgetown, says there are two reasons why government regulations help large corporations. One, the power to regulate the economy is the same thing as the power to distribute favors. Look at the examples I used earlier. Two, regulations hurt small businesses more than big business. If you look at the impact of regulatory costs on small firms by Nicole Crane and Mark Crane, a 2010 study from the U.S. Small Business Administration, the average big corporation with 500 plus employees has to spend about $7,700 per employee to apply with government regulations. Now, small business, 20 or less employees, has to spend about $10,500 per employee to comply with regulations. So the more regulation, the fewer competitors big corporations have. Again, here is my thesis. Every criticism of voluntarily funded competition in the private sector applies more so to a coercively funded monopoly. Yes, things are bad. That is no justification for the state entering and making things worse. Thank you for watching Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone.